Good evening and welcome to our Facebook Live, our first of our closer look at Kashrut in the series. Tonight we're going to be discussing the topic of think twice before you spice. And the goal is, of course, to discuss some of the most prevalent Kashrut issues that come up in the kitchen in a way that can actually lead to potentially causing an issue of Kashrut. So the goal is going to obviously be not to cover every single detail of some of the halachos and some of the rules in the kitchen regarding spicy foods, but we are going to hopefully talk about some of the major principles that are involved in the cases. And what we'll do is I'll start off with 3 practical scenarios that we will use kind of as our test cases as we discuss them for the next half an hour or so. So the first scenario that hopefully we will arm ourselves with the information to be able to discuss and to understand would be a scenario. Imagine yourself on a Friday afternoon and you're speedily getting ready for Shabbos. Shabbos is approaching, and without thinking, you're getting the cholent prepared, and you take your onion to put in your cholent and you cut it with a dairy knife. The knife has not been used in the past 24 hours, which would make it what we would call an Eino Ben Yomo knife, a knife that has not been used recently within 24 hours. You cut the onion with your dairy knife, and then without thinking, you throw the onion into the cholent, and you realize the next day when you're eating your cholent or when you're about to eat your cholent that the onion that was put in there was cut with a dairy knife. So that's one scenario that we can imagine taking place. Hopefully we'll be prepared before Shabbos and this won't actually happen on a regular basis, but that's one scenario. Another scenario that we might think about is, what if you are preparing a dish and you are chopping some garlic, and you take your meat knife, your fleishik knife, and you chop your garlic, and then because you want to get it nice and minced, you want to get it very, very small, not big cubes, but you want to get it nice and small, very minced. So you take the knife you take the garlic that you used your meat knife to cut up in smaller pieces, and then you put it into your blender, and as it's blending around, you realize that the blade in your blender is parv. So you cut the garlic with a meat knife, and now it's being mashed or blended with the parv blade in your blender. So that's another scenario that we could think about with an item, with a food that is particularly spicy, like garlic. And then the last scenario that we're going to discuss or think about is what happens if you need some lemon slices. So you take your lemon and you put it on a parv cutting board, and you take either a meat or dairy knife, and you cut your lemon on the parv cutting board. Does that pose any potential problem for the cutting board? Because the cutting board was parv, and the knife that you used to cut the lemon was either fleishigs or milchiks. So those are 3 scenarios that we're going to think about. And to understand these 3 scenarios and to kind of figure out the different components that go into answering these questions, so we have to understand some of the backgrounds here about what is it about a davar charif, or a spicy item, that makes a spicy item different than your standard food item in the kitchen. So we do know that when it comes to food items in the kitchen, you're preparing your different dishes. So food does have the capacity. There is an ability for food to actually transfer its taste into another item. We all know that we have 2 sets of pots and pans. One set is milchiks and one set is fleishiks. Why is a pot milchiks or fleishiks? The answer to that, of course, is that if you use a pot to cook something dairy or to cook something meat, some of the taste from that food item, from that meat food item or that dairy food item, actually gets absorbed into the pot, such that if you use the pot in the future, that taste can come out into the new food that's being cooked in the pot. So that would be why we have a pot that's a meat or a pot that is dairy. Now, if that's the case, so food has the ability to absorb into a pot. It also has the ability to absorb into a fork or to a knife. How does that happen? Normally, that can only happen if the food is hot, if there is heat that will enable the taste to be transferred from the food into the other item, in this case, the pot or the utensil. However, when it comes to a davar charif, if the food item that we are dealing with is not a classic food item, but rather is a spicy or sharp food item, literally charif means sharp. If it is a spicy or sharp food item, so then the Gemara tells us in Maseches Chulin that it actually has the capacity to transfer its taste, for taste to be absorbed into a utensil or into a pot or pan, even without heat. The mere pressure from the knife, the duchka de sakina, the knife cutting into that food item, into that spicy or sharp food item, that plus the sharpness it enables the taste to be transferred even if the food item and the pot or the utensil are cold. So this is the first anomaly, you might say, when it comes to a davar charef, a spicy item. It has the capacity to transfer taste even in the absence of heat, which is why sometimes in your common kitchen issues that might arise from the standpoint of kashrus, the most significant or the most problematic, so to speak, or potentially problematic, are those that involve dvarim charifim, items that are sharp or spicy, because there is the taste is transferred much more easily and can be done even without heat. So the first question we have to understand, we have to think about is, well, what items, I just use a few examples of an onion or a garlic, a lemon, what items are actually considered to be davar charef? What is an item that is considered to be spicy such that it will have a more potent ability to transfer its taste in the event of using a pressurized force of a knife or what have you in the kitchen, even if there's no heat? So the Gemara actually only has one example that it uses prominently as an example of a spicy or sharp food, and that is what the Gemara calls a tsnon, otherwise translated a radish. So there are many opinions. Many of the Rishonim, many of the commentators on the Gemara actually think that the only common example of a davar charef, of a spicy item that would pose this sort of kashrus problem, is actually a radish. All other items, even though they might taste sharp to us, don't actually meet the threshold of something that is davar charef, such that it would be considered a spicy item for the purposes of these halachos that we're going to talk about. However, many Rishonim assume, many of the Mefarshim, many of the commentators, they think that a radish, a tsnon, is just one example of an item which is a davar charef, but really many items could actually fall under the category of something that is sharp, such that its sharpness, its more potent taste, will actually potentially cause more problems when it comes to kashrus in the furtherance of taste absorption beyond your normal food item. So some of the commentators actually go so far as to say that this doesn't just include an onion or garlic or a jalapeno pepper, but it even would include citrus fruits, which have this acidic or perhaps even sour taste to them, or an element of a sour acidic taste to them. So something like a grapefruit or a lemon might also fall under the category of something that is considered a davar charef, is something that has a certain sharpness to it, such that it has the ability to transfer taste beyond your regular food item, even in the absence of heat, just with the pressure of a knife cutting on that item, the ability for that item to absorb the taste from that knife, even without heat. What is the normative practice? So of course, as in all of the discussions that we're going to have in this FaceTime live shiur, obviously one should consult with their local Orthodox rabbi before paskening any particular scenario or any particular issue that comes up. But one should be aware that there is, the mainstream position seems to be, the most common position seems to be, that an item which is significantly sharp, such that it's usually not eaten plain. For example, an onion or garlic, radish, jalapeno pepper, things of that sort. So those things, which would normally not be just eaten plain without any accompaniment, so those things, most of the Mefarshim, most of the poskim will assume, are considered a davar charef. However, something like a grapefruit, a lemon is a little bit more questionable, but something like a grapefruit or an orange, even though they're citrusy and sometimes can have a sour taste to them and sometimes have a little bit more of an acidic feel, nonetheless, those do not meet the threshold under normative psak that they would be considered davar charef. So the common psak is that something like an onion or garlic, that's going to be considered davar charef, even though it's not a radish and is not mentioned by the Gemara. But something like a citrus fruit, such as a grapefruit or an orange, which is commonly eaten plain, that would not be considered a davar charef. So now we've kind of introduced ourselves to the topic of davar charef and alluded to the first anomaly, the first aspect of davar charef, which makes it unique, namely that when it is used in a situation where there's a pressure that's applied to it, such as a knife cutting through it, even though normally for a knife to transfer taste that would be absorbed in the actual metal blade into the food item, it would have to be a scenario where the food item was hot, or if it was being used to stir a food item on the fire. So that would be able to transfer taste. But when it comes to a knife slicing an onion or slicing a davar charif, so it is going to, the taste is going to be extracted from the blade of the knife into the davar charif, even though there is no heat. So for example, if you would cut an onion with a fleshik knife, what would you be left with? You would not be left with a par of onion like you started. You would rather be left with an onion that has taste inside of it of fleshiks that it absorbed from the fleshik knife. That is point number one. Point number two, a second aspect of the davar charif, which makes it unique and particularly problematic in the kitchen, is that we have another principle in Hilchos Kashrut. That other principle is that if there is taste absorbed in a pot or in a utensil, so that taste is only going to, so to speak, have a lifespan of 24 hours. After 24 hours, that taste is considered to become rancid. And once that taste becomes rancid, it is no longer recognized by halacha, by the Torah, as being taste that could be potentially problematic. So therefore, if you have a knife that was used to cut a hot piece of non-kosher meat, so that knife would absorb the taste of that non-kosher meat. And within the first 24 hours, if you would use that knife to cut something else, there's potential for that taste of non-kosher meat to come out, to be extracted from the blade of the knife into your new item, such that that new item would be potentially usher because of the taste, it would be forbidden because of the taste of the treif meat that was absorbed into that item. This is, of course, assuming that the proportion of taste from the knife that is being absorbed into your food item is more than 1/60th. As we know, if something is less than 1/60th, so then it is considered to be null and void. It is not recognized as noticeably part of the food dish, and therefore it is batel, it is null and void. However, if it is more than 1/60th, that would be a problem. So back to our example, if you have a knife that had taste of non-kosher meat absorbed into it, and you use that knife within 24 hours to cut something, and that taste is absorbed into that item that you cut, so that item is going to be problematic. It is going to have the taste of treif meat in that item. After 24 hours, however, the normative halacha is, in most cases, since that meat has been sitting, that taste of meat that was sitting inside the blade of the knife has been sitting for 24 hours, that taste is considered to become rancid, is no longer good taste. It's called no sein tam livgam. It is bad taste. It is rancid taste. So if you now use that knife after the 24-hour period, from the letter of the law, that taste will not render your new dish treif. We paskin that knife should still not be used before koshering, and of course one should still kosher the knife before using it. However, if one accidentally used a knife that had absorbed treif meat taste in it more than 24 hours ago, and then it was used by accident without having koshered it, because the taste that's inside there has been sitting for 24 hours, it's considered rancid and will no longer impact the item that you cut, and the item that you cut can still remain kosher. So that is the normal halacha. However, what happens if you use that same knife and you cut a davar charif? You cut an item which is particularly spicy or sharp. The Gemara seems to imply, according to the read of most Rishonim, that if you do such a thing, even though the taste is rancid, after the 24 hours, the potency, the sharpness of your onion or of your radish is such that it will actually pull out the taste from the onion without heat, which is the first anomaly, and then it will not only pull out the taste, but the potency of your onion is such that it will actually revitalize the rancid taste and make it as if that rancid taste is considered to be good taste. No sein tam l'shvach. It's actually going to impact your new item in a positive fashion, in which case it is actually going to register as treif, as non-kosher taste in your onion. So if that's the case, the second anomaly is that if you have a milchik knife, even if it hasn't been used for 24 hours, and you use it to cut an onion, not only will the onion take out the milchik taste from that knife without heat, but just from the pressure of cutting the knife, it will also take out the taste and revitalize it. That even though the taste is over 24 hours old and is therefore rancid by all other measures, when it comes to being absorbed in that onion's potency will revitalize the taste and make that taste good taste, so to speak, such that it can then impact a dish and render it not kosher or render it milchiks. That is the second anomaly of a davar charif. There is yet another anomaly of a davar charif, in addition to the fact that it can absorb taste from inside of a kli without actually undergoing a heating process, but merely from cutting it with a knife. Obviously, if it is cooked, it of course is going to absorb the taste. But not only does it absorb taste, it also is able to revitalize what would otherwise be considered rancid taste that's 24 hours old, that was sitting for 24 hours, having already been absorbed into the blade of the knife or into the walls of your pot. So a davar charif will actually revitalize that taste, making that taste considered as if it was brand new, perfectly good taste. So that is the second anomaly. The third anomaly of the davar charif is that it can also create what would otherwise be referred to as secondary taste. It can turn it into primary taste. So what do we mean by secondary taste and primary taste? You probably think this is an extremely strange idea to think about the taste particles, but in halacha, there is a concept that taste that is absorbed from one item into another will still be recognizable and would still be halachically registered, so to speak, as long as it's less than 24 hours old, and as long as it's directly absorbed from item 1 into item 2. However, if you have a milchig plate, why is it milchig? Not because there's milk on it right now, but because your plate was used for milchigs, and let's say hot milchigs, so that there's actually taste of the milchigs that was absorbed into the actual body of the plate. So that plate is milchigs. That taste that goes into the plate, we can call primary taste. It comes directly from your milchig food that was on the plate. Now, if you use that same plate, and now you put a piece of fish on that plate, a parve piece of fish, so the parve piece of fish, if it's hot, can extract the taste of milchigs that has been absorbed into the body of the plate and take it into the fish. So now the taste of milchigs that's in the fish is not primary taste, it's secondary taste. It is taste that started off in a piece of cheese. The taste went from the piece of cheese into the plate, and then from the plate, that taste was absorbed into a second item, into your fish, and now it is secondary taste in your fish. When it comes to secondary taste in your fish, now we're talking about secondary milchig taste in our example. So the halacha actually is that if you would eat that fish on a plate that was meat, putting aside the issue of mixing meat and fish, the meat and the dairy would be too far removed. Since the dairy is not primary dairy taste, it's only secondary dairy taste. The meat taste and the dairy taste cannot pose any halachic problem of mixing milk and meat because it is secondary taste. So here's the third anomaly of a davar charif. When it comes to a davar charif, the examples that we've even alluded to, for taking a knife and slicing an onion, and the knife had taste of milchigs absorbed in the blade. So that taste that's absorbed into the blade, we would call primary taste. It is taste that came from using that knife on a hot piece of cheese, Danish or cheese kugel or whatever kind of cheese blintz you might want to have. So it was used for hot cheese. And now there's primary taste of cheese in that knife. Now you take the knife and you slice your onion. The onion is going to extract the taste from that knife, and it's going to go into your parve onion. What kind of taste would you have expected to be latent inside of this onion? We would have expected that to be considered secondary taste. It originated in cheese. It went from the cheese into the blade of the knife, and from the blade of the knife into the onion. That seems to be one step removed from its initial original source. So therefore, that would be called secondary taste. However, since we're dealing with a davar charif, the taste is in an onion. Not only does the onion have the ability to extract the taste without heat, not only does it have the ability to revitalize the taste if the taste was over 24 hours old, but it also has the ability to change what otherwise would have been secondary taste and make it primary taste, as if it had received the taste from the cheese alone. Such that now, if this onion was mixed with a piece of meat, it wouldn't be considered mixing cheese that was twice removed with meat, which would actually be okay, at least on a b'diavad level, post facto. But it is actually considered mixing primary taste of cheese with meat, which would for sure be prohibited. So just to review, we've thus far established that we have a davar charif. A davar charif is a particularly spicy item or particularly spicy dish that is, because it has lots of spicy spices or onions and garlic and what have you, so it's a very spicy tasting dish. So a davar charif is unique in that it has 3 anomalies as compared with your normal rules of Hilchos Kashrut. Anomaly number 1 is that taste can transfer through a davar charif even without heat. Normally, taste can only transfer in the presence of heat. Anomaly number 2 is that not only does it transfer taste without heat, but it also revitalizes taste that is otherwise rancid. And anomaly number 3 is that it can take what would otherwise be considered secondary taste and it would make it as if it is primary taste. So now that we have that background, let's take the last few minutes and go back to our initial 3 scenarios that we started off with. Scenario number 1 was you have an onion and it was cut with a knife that was milchix, and that knife that was milchix was not used within 24 hours. It was an Eino Ben Yomo knife. So now, what would you say would be the halacha of this onion? This onion, if you just analyze it from the simple perspective, so the onion, according to most opinions, is going to meet the threshold of a davar charif. It's a spicy item, so that it will extract the taste from the knife, even if it is cold. So the onion is going to have taste in it, which is milchix. Now, this knife was not used for 24 hours, but the simple understanding is, according to most of our authorities, that even though the taste is more than 24 hours old and would otherwise be considered rancid, if you would now use that knife to cut a hot piece of meat, that piece of meat would b'diavad be okay because the taste that was milchix in the knife was already rancid. But since you used it to cut an onion, and the onion is so potent, the taste is so strong, it is actually able to extract the taste and revitalize it and make it as if it is perfectly good taste. So now you have taste of dairy in your onion, and even though the knife was more than 24 hours old in terms of the last usage, that 24-hour taste is going to still be considered as if it is good taste. So it's extracted and it's good. Now, what about the fact that once that onion is put into your cholent, by accident, of course, it is put into your cholent, so now the taste of the dairy cheese that went into the onion from the dairy knife that was used for cheese more than 24 hours ago, so that dairy taste is secondary taste when it meets your cholent. Normally, we would say secondary taste when it meets your cholent would not pose a problem, at least b'diavad, because it is so far removed, the taste has been weakened and it's no longer going to create a scenario of basar b'chalav, a mixture of milk and meat. However, at least according to the simple understanding, since the onion revitalized the taste and transformed it into primary taste, this onion has the status of being dairy with primary dairy taste. And when it's mixed into your cholent, it is primary dairy taste being mixed into your cholent. That would be the simple understanding according to the majority of poskim. However, because, as we've noted, each one of these anomalies that exists within a davar charif has some minority dissenting opinion that would say that it would be permitted. So in a scenario where you can perhaps string together a number of different leniencies, there are some poskim who will be makel in certain circumstances. So now let's go back to our onion that we just had in our cholent. And really, if we were looking at it from a strict standpoint, we would probably say this onion is dairy, and if it's mixed in your cholent, so that would create a problem of basar b'chalav. However, let's look at number 1. What kind of item are we dealing with? We're dealing with an onion. According to some poskim, an onion is actually not a davar charif to begin with. According to some poskim, only a radish, which is mentioned in the Gemara, is a davar charif, is a sharp item. And therefore, there are some authorities who think that an onion doesn't even have the status of davar charif to begin with. So you take that into account. And then you add to that there are some opinions that even though the mainstream, the normative psak is that a davar charif will extract taste without heat, there are some opinions that the davar charif will revitalize your taste that has become rancid. There are some opinions who think that is actually not the case. That is not the way to read the Gemara in Chulin. Avodah Zarah. That is not the actual way to read the Gemara. And therefore, there are some dissenting opinions who think that a davar charif does not have the capacity to revitalize taste. That's not the normative psak, but it is a minority opinion. So if you couple the fact that the onion to begin with might not be a davar charif, and that there are some opinions that think that a davar charif doesn't even have the ability to revitalize rancid taste. And then there are further opinions who dissent and say that when you have secondary taste in a davar charif, it is still considered secondary taste. So you put all those things, these three things together, and now your onion, which might not be a davar charif, which has rancid taste in it, which may be revitalized according to many authorities, but according to some authorities, might not be revitalized, and might be considered secondary taste according to a minority of opinions. So you put all the three of those factors together, and then you might say that there is, in theory, room to be lenient on your cholents, at least in a case of great need. Now, obviously, we're not going to paskin this shiloh right here online. However, one should be aware that even though this onion does have the potential to pose problems, it is always worthwhile consulting a local Orthodox rabbi whenever dealing with a certain scenario, because, as you see, some of the different scenarios are such that you can string together a few different leniencies and sometimes come to a lenient position, even though if in an ideal world, if there were no other considerations, one might choose to be strict on such a matter. That's case number one. What about case number two that we mentioned? We talked about garlic that was cut with a meat knife. So you cut garlic with a meat knife, and then you throw it in your power of blender. So let's analyze the case again. So the garlic is, according to most opinions, going to be considered davar charif. It's cut with your meat knife. So according to most opinions, it is going to extract the taste, even though there's no heat. And even if that meat knife was not used for 24 hours, it's going to create new, good tasting taste. It is going to revitalize the otherwise rancid taste in the garlic. And now you take that garlic that has the meat taste, and again, according to many authorities, that meat taste is considered primary taste, as if it came directly from meat and not through the medium of the knife's sharpness cutting the garlic in between. So you have meat taste in your garlic, and now you throw the garlic into your blender. The blender is parv, and now the blade is swirling around and the garlic is being minced up, and you're saying to yourself, oh no, my parv blade is being used to chop a meat piece of garlic. So what is the halacha? In this case, again, whereas we have established that there is definitely room to be strict, there are opinions because, again, of the dissenting view that the ability for garlic to be considered davar charif might be called into question, that it's not a radish, so therefore it might not be a davar charif to begin with. And number two, that when it comes to the revitalization of taste, maybe that doesn't happen. And even if this is taste that is within 24 hours and it doesn't need to be revitalized, it was never rancid, so still it's secondary taste. And even if you want to say the secondary taste in the davar charif is going to be considered as if it's primary taste, that could just be vis-a-vis the davar charif as it interacts with another food item that will cause a potential problem basar b'chalav. So if you take that piece of garlic that has meat taste and put it into a dairy's pot that is cooking some sort of dairy sauce, so that might pose a problem of basar b'chalav. But here, it was thrown into a blender. And now the blender blade is cutting that. So the blade was parv and now is taking taste from your piece of garlic and absorbing it into the blade. And it's not going to come into contact with another food item until you put more food in your blender. And most of the time it's going to be parv food. So the fact that you have such a discrepancy, that's so far removed the original meat taste from where it's going to end up in your parv blender, even though normally we might say going through the medium of davar charif makes secondary taste as if it's primary, in this instance, it is possible to actually paskin and to hold that the taste is far enough removed that it will still be considered secondary taste. Again, this is a major machlokas, a major disagreement amongst the authorities, and one should consult their local Orthodox rabbi. But these are some of the considerations to take into account in our second case that we posed, in the case of garlic cut with a meat knife and then thrown into a parv blender. And the last case that we spoke about was the case of a lemon that was used to cut to a milchik or fleishik knife to cut it, and you used a parv cutting board. So again, here this is another machlokas in the authorities, because some assume that when you apply the pressure of the knife on the lemon, again assuming a lemon is a davar charif, which many authorities do assume, however, there is disagreement on that point as well. But if you cut your lemon with a dairy knife, so the pressure that the knife exerts on the lemon is going to be also met with pressure from the cutting board on the bottom. And it could be that that pressure that is being applied to the cutting board as well will be viewed as if the dairy taste is coming from your knife into the lemon, being extracted from the lemon, and then is also going to be absorbed into the cutting board because of the additional pressure being exerted by the cutting board on the bottom of your lemon as you cut down on the lemon between the knife and the cutting board. This is opinion. There are some poskim who are machmir in this situation. However, many poskim are makel that the pressure that is applied by the knife is the pressure that actually will create the ability for the lemon to absorb the taste from the knife in the absence of heat. But the pressure from the cutting board, by virtue of the fact that it is less direct and also by virtue of the fact that it is more spread out, is significantly less than the pressure of the knife. And therefore, the fact that there's dairy taste in the knife going through the lemon will not actually be transferred into the cutting board because the pressure is not great enough between the lemon and the cutting board because it is more spread out over the area. And therefore, some poskim are lenient in the latter scenario. So again, to summarize, we saw that there are certain items which are considered sharp, or davar charif. The Gemara for sure says a radish is a davar charif. Beyond a radish, normative psak would tell us that an onion, garlic, things that are naturally spicy that would not be consumed plain would also be considered davar charif, at least on the level of lichatchila in your ideal scenario. And the davar charif has three unique character traits. Number one, it can absorb taste without heat. Number two, it can revitalize rancid taste and make it into problematic good taste. And number three, it actually has the ability to change what would otherwise be considered secondary taste, making it primary taste. And we discussed three different examples of how a davar charif might pose a particular problem in the kitchen, because in all three of those examples, there was no heat, which normally is a prerequisite to causing a kashrut issue in your kitchen, but in this case, it is not. So we spoke about three different scenarios and analyzed how, even though from one standpoint, there is definitely a reason to think that one should be machmir, in certain circumstances, one might be able to analyze each particular component of that you can string together a number of leniencies to come out with a lenient position. I thank you all for taking the time and watching this short excerpt on some of the kashrut issues that revolve around davar charif. I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Have a good night.